Good morning. It's already 11:30. It's amazing how time flies. The last few days I was staying in Ukiah and not sleeping very much. I had an anxiety, I guess, because I would stare at my phone a lot before going to sleep, and then I would wake up at like 7:30. I guess there's nothing bad about waking up early, but a few days of it I felt a little sleep deprived. And last night I went to sleep at maybe about 11 and woke up about 9:40 was, remember, when I first looked at the clock. But I didn't look at the clock right when I woke up. That's nice to think, 10 hours of sleep. Although it wasn't continuous, I woke up a few times. Because last night was the first night I slept in the van. I imagined writing a reflection of what's been happening on the trip so far as sleeping. But instead I'm making a video about it right now in the Redwoods, in Montgomery Redwoods Preserve. The first 2 weeks after I left New York, I slept alone in my own apartment. A friend gave me his apartment while he was away. And I don't know if it was being in the past, seeing old friends, trying to love or not love or make some kind of connection besides sex, or if it was doing work, massage. And there was a profound loneliness, though, in staying alone, and I got really depressed and felt badly for a few days. Even though I had great times, I was sleeping alone the whole time. Then I went to Brightonbush, and I slept alone there as well, but I was touching people all day, every day. One of the things that was, and not even having sex, it was one of the things I was really amazed by, that I didn't ejaculate for a few days. For 10 days. But I was just touching people, hugging them, giving them love. I guess I had sex with a few people. And it was weird. Some of them I felt like that's what they wanted. I mean, a lot of the times when we show attention to somebody, that's where or physical attention to somebody, that's where the channel automatically goes, especially in gay culture, especially when I'm naked. And people just read that as a sexual come-on. That's happened many, many times in my life. But it was weird. Anyway, I didn't orgasm, and I didn't feel like I needed to. I didn't feel like I needed to for many days. I went from there to Madras, where I slept alone as well, in a tent, which I shared with someone for a night or two. But anyway, there was no cuddling. So this was all sleeping alone, and then there was a lot less touching, but there was a lot of interacting with being around people in a small space, and a very large space with like 3,000 or 5,000, I don't remember the number, of people around us in the campsite. So again, there was no sexual desire. I went from there down to a friend's place in Northern California and continued to sleep alone. And there, I started to get really horny because I wasn't, like, it had been a few days since I was walking around naked, touching everybody, being touched by people and hugging people. So it was interesting then to notice this type of lust building up, desire. However, it was also a very grounding place where I meditated. Not every morning. The first few mornings I wasn't in sync with the other guys, but I meditated a bit on my own. But then the next few mornings, I was there for a week. The next few mornings I meditated for an hour every morning with the other guys that were there. I did some qigong and did some yoga and went for walks every day, sometimes up in the mountains, but mostly just around the town. There was a nice feeling of freedom to be able to walk around the town, do shopping, get food. And there was a bit of a frustration of not being able to go up into the mountains or to the hot springs when I wanted to because I didn't have a car. And being in Northern California, I was talking to nice hippie friends that were like, yeah, we should do that. And it didn't happen. Oh, yeah, we'll do that tomorrow morning, and it didn't happen. Oh, we'll do that in the afternoon, and it didn't happen. A little frustrating, but not a big deal. I was able to just let it roll off my back, but that was also a time when I felt very organized and creative, and I know that Mercury was conjunct the sun, but still, that's when I really started doing a lot of the videos. That's when the interviews started, and I finally got to just put the numbers on the 39 stories and started recording them. So I was like, oh, this is really great. I had been jerking off to porn then as well. But sleeping alone, and I went from there to another house in Northern California, an hour or two south, and I was still sleeping alone, but not sleeping as well. I think there was a lot more emotional energy in the air, less grounded and not... Oh, there's a different type of grounding. There's a different type of grounding. But less space for me, I would say, to feel... to just walk around naked and make videos. I felt like my attention was much more taken by the person I was with, which made a lot of sense because the other person I'd stayed with, he had just come from this gathering and he had tons of people coming and visiting every day. I mean, that was one of the fun things about staying at his house. There were tons of people visiting. Whereas the second person I stayed with, he didn't have tons of people visiting. And, you know, there was more like, oh, it's so nice to have someone here to hang out with and talk with and do things with. So it was great. I would say it was still positive. It was just a definite shift of energy. And then I kind of made a misstep. Something clicked in the retrograde, and I went back to Indiana and the southern Oregon coast and the forest fires and the terrible to breathe, and slept with someone for a few nights. It was the first time I'd slept with someone for a long time. I guess about a month or over a month at that point. And it was... the first night I slept fine, the second night I didn't sleep at all, and then I ran screaming. I found him disturbing in just how normal mid-American he was. He was from Indiana. He'd only lived out there 2 years. And I made all sorts of judgments about the way he shopped. And again, it's one of those things that's happened where people have been like, yeah, I love hiking. We should go hiking. And then when I get there, oh, I don't want to walk. You know, there's a bunch of things. But ultimately, I noticed there was that sensation of like, maybe this person I could live with, you know, before I met him. And then when I met him, I was like, what the fuck was I thinking? But I was judging him by that. Like, I couldn't live with this person. I couldn't, you know, shouldn't have been that at all. But fortunately, I ran away within 2 days and had a little meeting with another person who gave me a ride over the I-5, who also really, I don't know, there's a type of stress that comes from being around people that are very lonely. I mean, maybe I'm very lonely, but I keep moving so that the energy's not too heavy. And maybe that's what happened when I was alone in Oregon without even my regular friends to connect with. Or even though I was connecting with people every day, I felt very lonely. Lonely is distasteful. Loneliness is distasteful. It's not delicious. But I got back in a flow there. I slept alone that next night, but not very well. The bed, I'm sure, was filled with mites or something. So itchy. It's okay. I ran into, I was like, how do I get south? I'll get another Greyhound bus. And then I was like, oh no, I can look on Craigslist rideshare, which I used to use up and down the West Coast a lot. And sure enough, there was someone that lined up with what I sent out many messages, but one that I finally connected with that actually seemed to go where I was going. He said, oh, I'm a queer 33-year-old, blah, blah, blah. And I sent him my Facebook page, so he knew who he was dealing with. And he said, oh, I think we've met before. And he sent me his Facebook page, and indeed we had met in Tennessee at the Radical Fairy Sanctuary. And I was like, oh, wow. And continuing with the West Coast magic, serendipitous, flaky, or not flaky, non-specific scheduling, I got there and then we were going to spend the night instead. And it ended up being a bunch of people, some people I had met at the Fairy Gathering in Brighton Bush and some people I'd met in Tennessee also, but hadn't seen for 7 years. So that felt really kind of magical of being like, wow, look at this. And I had great conversations and it felt really positive. And the next morning I got to soak in the hot springs. It was great. And then we drove down to Sacramento. And again, I stayed with an old friend that I slept with. There's the second person I'd slept with. And he seemed very lonely and unhappy, really depressed. And I'd known him since I was 19, and I'm aware that he goes through patterns of depression. And I felt like if I wanted to stay with him for a week, I've reflected on this sense, like if I stayed with him for a week, I could have cleaned his house, and that would have been very nice of me. I just finished cleaning this van, which I'll talk about more in a minute. It was actually the impetus of this video. I could have cleaned his house. I could have tried to help him. But I felt a bit shocked and a bit lost and a bit stressed. So I didn't help him. And I ran as quickly as I could. I did see my cousin. I don't think I slept super well with him. And I know the second morning I think he tried to wake me up and have me serve him somehow, and I was like, no. Which I felt kind of self-defensive but also a little bad about. But our relationship had never been one of us having sex. It was always a type of different friendship. Anyway, a friend came by, and a mutual friend of ours who I've known for years, and he drove me down to LA. And I ended up spending the night at his house, and I slept alone as well. I think I slept a lot that night, which I felt like I needed after that. The next day was stressful, and we spent the whole night driving. I did end up crashing out for a couple of hours, and then he crashed out for a couple of hours, and I drove the rest of the way into San Francisco, and then we both crashed out for a couple of hours. And then I went up to Mendocino and slept alone again. I guess mostly I've been sleeping alone. I slept okay in Mendocino, except I was woken up every morning at 7. The friend I stayed with had an alarm set at 7, so it would just go off, and I'd hear him walking around. And I think there was one morning when I was able to go back to sleep for a couple of hours, but for the most part, I woke up every morning at 7 or earlier, regardless of what time I went to sleep. But I think we went to sleep relatively early. I think there was 1 or 2 nights I stared at my phone a lot. And that was a really interesting emotional experience because Mercury retrograde was over, but I don't know if Venus is in retrograde. I don't think so. But I just felt like I was back in California, like the last time I was in California, which was taking care of my friend Leo. Because the guy I was staying with in Mendocino, he was in a lot of pain. Let's say he's not sick, he was just in a lot of pain, which is a type of sickness. And so the first 2 days, I really dedicated all of my energy to cooking and cleaning and just caring for him. And then I was like, whoa, I need to back off and do some self-care. And so I paid attention to my own needs for the next day and kind of withdrew from him pretty intensely and then kind of balanced out the day after that. I think it was the next day after that we drove back down to the city and I spent a couple nights sleeping with him. All night. And maybe the last night in Mendocino we slept together as well. And it was a very similar energy to sleeping alone, really. It was that we were just cuddling and he'd wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I'd just be awake. And there was probably a similar vacillation of the excitement of taking care of someone. Excitement. The obligation, the duty, the joy of having purpose. Purpose is sexy. A note I made a few days ago. The joy of having purpose. Being needed by someone. Purpose. Somewhere between those two. And then I went to stay with some other guy that I had initially when my plan to go to San Francisco area, I was going to stay with someone in the East Bay, and then somebody in the Castro, and then somebody up in the Haight. Instead, I stayed with the guy in the Haight first, and then the guy in the Castro, and I didn't end up staying with the guy in the East Bay at all, but I did visit him. And the guy in the Castro I stayed with, well, let's say once we got to San Francisco, and this has always been my relationship with San Francisco, the guy I'd been spending 5 or 6 days with in Mendocino, although we had talked about each other as if we were lovers, I was like, let's just make it like we're old-time lovers, that we've been lovers for like 50 years. He quoted Papa Was a Rodeo by Magnetic Fields, and we listened to it a few times, and of course there's that. Now it's 55 years later, and we've had the romance of the century, so we just went with that. We're 55 years later, we've had the romance of the century. The last night we were together, he was admittedly out of his mind, but he said, I think I'm falling in love with you. And I was like, you don't need to fall. You'll just cut yourself again. Just be in love with me. It's fine. And then the next guy I stayed with, the very first day we were together, he said, I feel like I'm falling in love with you. And I said, you don't need to fall, but you can be in love with me. Let's just be in love. And he was like, okay, I love you. And I was like, or maybe I started it. One of us started it where we said, I love you. And then we repeatedly said it over and over and over and over and over. So this week was very interesting to me. I was sleeping with this guy, and he was this big, beautiful bear, so super furry and sweet and kind. I didn't feel like there was a cultural connection. That's so weird. What do you call that when you relate to someone's music and how you spend time with someone, like art or movies or whatever? But the physicality was wonderful. And the fact that we were both saying I love you to each other all day kept the heart opening. And so these other people I was dealing with, even the guy up in the Haight, who there was a lot of love and intimacy and friendliness with. There was a fear. The fear of watching someone die. Being with someone while they die. And the fear of the attraction being economical. The gold digger part of me, there is this feeling like, oh, well, I could have given up my life for Leo, but then I would have had nothing. I hated the place that he lived, the Lake County. It was depressing, and I never got along with anyone there, and I did not find it an inspiring place to live. And he didn't have any money, and his house was owned by the church. So if I would have stayed and taken care of him, I would have just, been the same place I was 10 years before with having nothing. He'd be dead, and I'd have to move on. I'd have no place to stay and no, way of making money and all that stuff. I just, I don't like this at all. But this other guy I was just taking care of, who there was a lot of correlations. The way he dressed and the way he walked and the landscape, the emotional landscape too, seemed also similar, except that he did mention things like he'd sold a building for $1 million and $1.6 million, and then he had the other 4 buildings, and he had this building up here and this building over there, and I was like, oh, history and money. And he said, oh, that annoying thing where when I was younger I didn't have any money, and now I have the money and I don't have the health. So there was this feeling like, oh, well, I could take care of him and then I'd actually have an inheritance. A house in the city. A house in the country. Like that mythical house in England. Rooms to rent out for an income. Oh, man, the emotional turmoil that will cause amongst the people if I try to do that, or if he does that. So there was a lot of heart contraction around that, hating myself for being greedy, but also the confusion of really liking, I don't know, being needed, but also being appreciated. More being appreciated. How nice it was that when I would touch him, he would just moan with pleasure of being touched. He was like, "Oh, I just don't get touched enough." And I could sit there and pet him. I mean, he has dogs, and I'm not a dog person, but I could sit there and pet him, and he was just so happy. And like a dog, old men, they die quicker than you do, usually. But unlike a dog, he's got a fascinating history, and he's intelligent and has an estate. Anyway, so I'm staying with this other guy who's much simpler and very cuddly and this very present, simple, clear, "Oh, I know you're not going to stay with me forever, but I feel like we'll have a friendship forever, and I love you." And I'm like, "And I love you, and I love you, and I love you." And it feels so good to say I love you. The heart opens and it resonates and it feels good. To balance out the contraction, the difficulty, visiting the guy in the East Bay who I was going to stay with but didn't stay with, and just feeling like all of his wisdom and efforts that he's just dissipating. And one of my hopes and expectations was, it'll be so nice to be with somebody who's a sexual professional, a sexual wizard, a sexual teacher, maybe someone who's on par with my sex skills. And he wasn't. I couldn't fuck him as long as I wanted to. He tried to go into a place of metaphor with me, but he was too materially based because he was a Taurus. So where I was being like, the tantra of transformation in the astral realms or whatever, in the subtle realms, he was like, no, it's just the metaphor. I don't know, we didn't click very well. And then I went to visit some guy also in the East Bay that just made me depressed because he was this big bear who I would have found attractive. I found attractive in the pictures, but I didn't find attractive in person. And he was like, "Well, I have to have a cocktail when I get off work, and I have to smoke a couple bowls," and just this whole feeling of people who are like, my life is so unhappy that I have to totally blitz myself out to feel okay in my time. Like if I give a certain amount of time to my work and then I give a certain amount of time to myself, like to have to be totally inebriated to feel okay with yourself. And you can't do that at work because you have to be this automaton that fulfills a function. Anyway, makes me very depressed. And he kept wanting to have sex with me, and but I was just like, I don't want this. I don't want to interact with this energy. I went back and stayed with the guy I was staying with, sleeping with. Second to last night, I spent the night with an old friend. Well, we tried to be lovers for a little bit. In the year 2000 or 2001 or 2002 or something, it didn't work. But we've been friends. And it was weird. We slept together. We cuddled a bit. Nothing sexual happened. And then the next morning, he was like, "Oh, I wanted to hire you to give me a massage." And that just felt weird, that I was like, oh. I guess it's not that different than some of my friendships, that I don't really connect with them sexually, and so they hire me to get all the physical attention they desire. We can only work with people how they work, and that's, we can only love people how they're open to being loved, and we can only be loved by people and how they're open to loving us. And so that's part of my rules, my laws, my path. So that's what people have to do. And then I went back to stay with that big bear one more time. And again, it was just so simple and nice and cuddly and Then I went back to stay in the Upper Haight for a few nights. And it felt really weird because we were sleeping together, but we seemed disconnected. And again, I felt like being with him was a state of need. like he was out of his mind, like he didn't remember or know what was going on with me. I mean, I don't think he was drinking. Maybe he was. But he was just on opioid painkillers, and I made these cannabis tinctures for him, CBD tinctures, and he just seemed out of his mind. I don't know what he remembered of us being together. When I talked about it later, he didn't seem to remember anything, but he didn't tell me he remembered anything, so he might have, I don't know. And he made dates with these other people. Both of the nights I was staying there after his friends left, I thought, okay, we can have a couple nights alone together. And I had planned to not do anything but be with him. But he made dates with other people, which made me feel really bad. And it was a jealousy, but it was also a void of course. And so it was a jealousy in that there was like, I'm here giving my time to you, or offering my time to you, and you just want these other people that you've had before that live in this area. And one of them he hadn't seen for a year and a half, so that was kind of understandable, but I didn't know he was going to take the whole evening with him, and they just watched TV together. Which I'll get to in a minute, but they ate fast food and watched TV together. And I had all these judgments of like, this is somebody who lives off Diet Coke, takes his fucking Western medication, and eats fast food. He grew cannabis not because of he respected the plant or believed in its medicinal properties. He just wanted the money. But oh, Dominic, your ideals, nothing in the world lives up to them. Especially nothing in the world you want to have sex with. And then the next night he was like, well, I'm not sure if this guy's going to come over, but I'd like him to come over, but he might spend the night, but I don't know if he's going to spend the night, but he won't spend the night if you're here. And I was like, so all of this vague, and this guy was married to someone else, so it's not even like it doesn't matter if there's a potential for a relationship when you're 71, right? Some kind of relationship. No propriety, I guess. No potential for propriety. So I felt really sad and I left. And it also lined up with working out that my friend who was offered to give me this van to drive across the country was able to drive the van up. And I met him in South San Francisco. We spent the night at a friend of his house that was in one of those awful person storage unit apartment building things, which for some reason in New York City, when it's a big cement block, it's not as gross to me, the body storage units, because that's what most of New York City buildings are. I mean, it's really nice if you get to live in a house, but most of them are just body storage units. But in so much of America, they're like, this is a home. And they try to make it look like it's got some kind of personality, and it doesn't. It's just these terrible body storage units and this incredibly artificial looking thing. They're like mazes of emptiness. And anyway, it was a very, very nice night. We had nice food, and we walked around the lake nearby. And then we played some video games, but they were VR video games, which I'd never played before, and they were very disorienting and stressful and caused me to be in panic and fear. And I'm like, wow, yeah, that's what entertainment is a lot of the time. I don't like that. It was still a cool experience, though, to be completely dissociated. It was like being on drugs, and I definitely see their application in that level, that VR is like being on drugs. You dissociate into another realm. It's not exactly the high I'm looking for, though. Panic and fear and stress. Sharks attacking you and cars running over you. And the puzzle game with the little man was fun, though. PS4. And then the next morning, I dropped my friend off at the airport and visited some other friends in the East Bay and ran into another friend who was like, yeah, you understand that living life on the edge has not worked for you and that you need to live a more centered life. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. centered life. And, I kept confusing it with the ideology of, like I was saying about the guy in the South Oregon coast, this living a central life, like living in the middle of the country. Shopping at fucking big box stores. Everything disposable. Everything distracting. Lonely and isolated. I don't want that. I don't know what the edge is, I was always attracted to leathermen and artists and weirdos and goths and those kind of edges don't work for me. A straight hippie world, I'm not straight, I don't know what to do with it. But I do keep thinking that the type of men I'm attracted to sexually they're just so bad for me. Detrimental, retrograde. It should be such a clear sign to just give up on it. And yet there's the greed. Or pleasure. Money. Comfort. Safety. Safety from what? The last people I stayed with, also from Indiana. I had met 7 years ago when they moved to California, and I continually built up feelings of a potential interest or affinity with them. First day I was there, I had sex with one of them for hours and hours and hours and hours. It was kind of fun, although he was kind of violent. It was painful. He was like, "You can't tell my partner. This is just secret, just between us." And he went on for hours. Hours. About how he wasn't being respected and was so unhappy in his relationship, and they were seeing therapists. And it was hilarious because he'd been with this guy for 13 years. His partner was a doctor. He hadn't worked for at least the last decade. At least the last decade he had not worked. He had been completely supported by his partner. At this point he had 4 dogs and a cat, 3 of which were strays. So he said, "Oh, I'm managing the house." I'm like, "You're a housewife. You don't have kids. You have fucking dogs. And you feel like you don't want to put out because your husband's not respecting you." Respecting you for fucking what? Being irritating? Of not being grateful for the amazing life you have? Being taken care of by someone? I had sex with some guy in San Francisco right before I left who was a priest and some Christian anthroposophy. Fuck. Androsophy. The wisdom of humankind, of wisdom of mankind. Anthroposophy. Anthropology. Not anthropology. Anthroposophia. Anyway, he went on about the wisdom of the human being and Christ and feeling the worldview press up against his worldview. My worldview press up against his worldview. And my worldview right now is very Buddhist, but also, I can look through my whole life of perceptions, insights, that have led me to this place. I was just walking in the woods just moments before recording this video, and I was thinking that for years I've wanted peace, and I've thought war stories were terrible and stupid. And my friends who believe in the aliens or they want another story besides the one they've been given. They don't want the mainstream story. They want another story, but the stories all involve characters and time frames and places, and all of these are delusions from a Buddhist / Brahmin / Indian viewpoint. And they all require war. They're all dependent on war, on strife. Separation is dependent on strife. It takes a lot of effort to keep the self separated and apart. You and I, self and other. The energy of a nuclear bomb. Effort to rip things apart. And after giving up wanting to destroy everything, I just wanted peace. I just want peace. And I've wanted peace most of my life now. Running from place to place, looking for peace. An adventure! What? War! Very confused. Very confusing. And cold. In this forest. So quiet. When I parked the van here last night, I was like, it is so quiet. 2 nights ago, last night I was staying at these guys' house. I was looking through Facebook when I could have been sleeping. And I just got this idea of like, well, I'm going to drive across the country. There's all these people I kind of wanted to meet, and I could meet them. Now I'm driving across the country. And one of the people in Oklahoma that I wanted to meet, his account's been disabled. We just interacted recently. I don't know what's going on. And I wonder, did he die? And I was looking through a couple other people that I was interested in. People who comment on my stuff regularly, who have big beards and big bellies. I'm like, I'd like to meet them. Looking through different people and their friends of friends. There's a big beard and bear collection. People who are friends with each other. Like each other. And there's this one guy who changed his profile recently, and I just find him very attractive. I've never talked to them a lot, but he likes things I post a lot of the time, and he just seems like a very friendly person. And he posted this picture that I just clicked on it, and I was like, oh my God, his face is radiating such happiness. It filled me with joy just to look at his face in this picture. It was him and his husband. And he had put like, this was my favorite picture of me and my big bear. I can't believe my big bear is gone. And I was like, what? And I didn't actually know very much about this guy. I didn't know what his husband looked like. We'd never talked much. We were just beard collectors that, liked each other's pictures from time to time. And I fell into a bit of a hole looking through all these posts about his husband who had just been killed in a car crash. I mean, my initial impression was like, he died of a heart attack, or he died of aneurysm or something. No, he died in a car crash. And that's all the information I could find was that he died in a head-on collision, possibly a distracted driver. He did not survive. And it was weird. It just made me cry. You know, to think of how rare it is to love someone and be loved by them and have a healthy, somewhat happy relationship, and then everyone dies. Disease, car crash, suicide. Find the right one and they die. Anyway, quoting music. Look at the light, the lens flare. And that immense radiating joy I saw in his face, you know, led me to crying, led me to sadness, compassion, and confounded with the sorrow of attachment. Such joys bring such sorrow. Imagine all the happiness he's had in his life. The conditional happiness attached to his partner. And the immense suffering he's experiencing now at the loss of him. It's so strange. The heart wants to be compassionate and get muddled up in the sorrow, or the heart wants to be smug and say, see, that's what you get for loving someone. That's what you get. So I got this van and I spent the last few days cleaning it. Probably about 10 hours or more of time cleaning it. A couple of hours just going through the trash, the mold, rotten food. Threw out a couple bags of trash, and then the next day I threw out a couple more bags of trash and sorted through and organized things and vacuumed and washed the outside. And then the next day I washed the inside, you know, wiped down all the dusty, dirty stuff on the inside and scrubbed the moldy stuff on the floor with a carpet upholstery cleaner. Started buying things that I might want on the road trip. Oh, this is my bed now. I did all the laundry and cleaned out. You know, this is my home, my turtle. Like V for Victory, the van that I drove across the country. This is Little Red Riding Hood. Stealth hippie van. Toyota Sienna. SLE? I don't remember what the letters were. I think it was SLE. Last night was my first night sleeping in it. I did not sleep super well. It was nice to sleep alone again. Although I've been sleeping alone mostly for the last few days anyway at this house I was staying at, but it still felt weird. Separation. And I've had crabs. I don't remember when I last had them in New York City. But I discovered them at some point in Portland and did a treatment. And then I did a treatment again right before going to Brighton Bush. And then after the eclipse gathering, I found some again. And so I did a treatment as soon as I got to Shasta, the next place I went to. And then I found out the friend I was staying with there had them. So then we did a treatment together. And I did another treatment right before I left because I was there for a week. So I've been doing it like twice a week for a month. And I still keep finding them. I've been doing crab treatments twice a week for a month, and I still keep finding them. Back of my neck, mostly. Beard. It always makes me feel like I'm a parasite. The metaphor being like, I'm a parasite. I am like these crabs. That's why they are so prolific, because I am a parasite. A pestilence. It's so quiet here. Bird swoops overhead, bug swoops overhead, leaves rustle in the trees. I heard a squirrel earlier this morning, not much else. Yeah, I want to be good. Live through this life, do something good for the world. Not be a pestilence. Not be a louse. But I don't know what to do, what's good for this world, because all good is evil. All interaction is war. All happiness is pain and suffering. All contact is friction. You can't hold people hostage to your life choices, especially if they don't work for you. My response to that was, I don't think they work for anyone. I mean, look at this nightmare political situation we're in, and the war and the destruction of the earth and the atmosphere and the environment. I mean, I don't think anybody's life choices are working for anyone. He was taking too many antihistamines and going blind. Is that working for you? How's that working for you? So why do we need Sangha to get free? Maybe you don't need Sangha to get free. Life is very long when you're lonely. It's enough for now. I'm going to go walk through the redwoods some more and try to enjoy a little bit of existence.